What's up everybody, welcome back to this final video in this breakdown series of my piece Internal Resolve. So in the first two videos we talked about the theory and the structure behind the piece. In the second video we talked about the orchestration and the arrangement, and this final video we'll be diving into the mixing and the processing behind the tracks to make them all fit together and sound good as a whole. So before we start, I want to show you my my step-by-step mixing checklist. I've gotten many questions about how I mix my tracks, and I've actually done an entire mixing series on my channel here very recently. But in case you'd like a guide that you can physically hold on to and download and print out if you like, I have a completely free PDF guide down in the description box below that you can download for absolutely free. It's a 6-step process that I follow every single time when I mix music, and I basically use it to keep myself on track, basically, So it's basically my step-by-step workflow that I use to start a mix with the raw tracks, bring up the faders, start mixing the tracks, and then finally export a finished master. So it'll give you all the steps you need to know. Absolutely free. Just download it in the description box below and you can follow along. So without any further ado, let's get into this mix over here, which, by the way, I followed the steps for that. So for this mix anyway, from the guide. So anyway, let's get into the mixer window here in Logic, and let's take a look at my mixer view. So how many plugins do you think I have here? Let's take a look. We have an EQ on the Zhonghu Solo. We have an EQ on the Daron chords. We have an EQ on the Siu and a little Mixcentric, a little EQ on the drum beat, and an EQ on the Mongolian Women. Basically an EQ on every single track. And this is what I do to basically start out every mix session I have. I basically apply an EQ to every track, and whether or not I apply EQ and actually boost or cut anything, that decision will come later. But this is a way for me to prep the instruments for mixing. So this is just an example. For the claps, I use the EQ and I apply a high pass filter to basically cut out any low end that might build up over the course of all these tracks being stacked together. So once I have the high pass filter applied to most of the instruments, then I start finding other frequencies that either I want to boost or I want to take out, because some of them are less desirable and some of them sound better, right? So in this case, for the claps, which is over here, let's have a quick listen to what the claps sound like. It's actually right? So you hear that high end there, you hear that crispiness if I just solo that frequency, right? And here's the low end we're cutting out. You can hear it there. It's not very desirable. We don't need that, right? Because we can't hear that in the mix. I also cut out this part, this frequency here. Just felt a little boxy to me. And then this frequency over here. Wait, so sorry, this blue one is here. So that kind of sound there, I didn't really like that, so I cut that out. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm trying to find all the frequencies that will contribute to a messy mix, and any frequencies that might offend the overall sound, and take them out as needed. Now, the amount you do it is until you start hearing that change in the instrument and how it fits within context of everything else. So sometimes you'll have to make very, very delicate moves like minus 1.3 decibels. Sometimes you'll have to bring it down further, like 4.24 decibels. It really just depends on your ear and how much you deem necessary to remove or add to the track. In this case, I wanted to add some more high frequencies. So you can see I boosted it up like 3 decibels for more high end. And for a lot of these instruments, I basically brought out some of the high end to give it that clack and the air, while taking out some of the mid-range and then giving it a high pass filter to get rid of any low end that would really build and cause a problem. So yeah, that's kind of how I prep the mix. So once that's all done, actually it sounds a lot better. The next step is to bring all the faders down to 0 and then raise them one by one until I get a nice natural sounding balance for at least 85% of the way, 85% of the entire track. So of course, there's always going to be parts where you want to bring up the instrument at a certain point and then maybe lower it at a certain point where it's too loud in another section of the song. But what we're doing in this step of the static mix is we're trying to get everything even, and we're trying to get a nice balance of all the instruments. So the next step would be to actually go to top-down mixing. The first thing I like to do is, well, top-down mixing, again, is where you apply the processing to the master fader or the master bus. Then we go down to any groups where the instruments are set to, which go to the output, the master. Then you go down to the individual tracks. So I like to work this way because if I top-down mix and I get a nice sounding mix, a general sounding mix that applies for everything, then I have to do less work when it comes to the individual tracks, which is always nice. The first plugin I always put on is a directional mixer, which puts everything to mono. So in Logic, the directional mixer you can, so like usually it's at 1. So I bring the spread all the way to the middle and we get this mono sound, right? And mixing in mono basically helps you to very deliberately focus on each mixing decision. Like if you can't hear a certain instrument in mono, then that means that the level or the volume is not enough on that instrument, or maybe the EQ or the panning's not quite right, or mainly the EQ and the volume. So mixing in mono forces you to really think about every mixing decision you make. So mixing in mono is definitely a really cool trick I learned from Graham Cochran over at the Recording Revolution. And next I applied an overall EQ, and I just put it on these two bands right here. So hear the little bit of, it's almost a boxy sound, which I don't quite like. And I took that out a bit, 2 decibels. And then this one here. This was almost like a whistling sound, which isn't very nice either. Actually, let's take those both out and see what they sound like. Take the EQ off. So I personally find it cleans it up a little bit. I kind of like that. Then I added a compressor to do a little bit of reduction. And then naturally I boosted it up about that same amount. But I really like the character that this compressor gave the piece. So I stuck with that Logic stock compressor. Then I went with Greg Wells Mixcentric. And this is what this plugin does. So I'm going to turn it off actually, and then turn it back on. So I'm going to turn it on. You hear how the mid-range kind of just pops out, and it kind of cleans everything up just a little bit. Really beautiful. Then I added some Tone Centric, which is again another Greg Wells plugin, and it just adds some nice harmonic saturation to the overall mix. Really beautiful. And finally, I added the limiter after tweaking some of the individual tracks. I think the only other plugin I applied is the Greg Wells Mixcentric to the CU Solo, because it was sounding a little muffled. I just wanted it to be a little clear, a little brighter. So Mixcentric helped me do that. I could have done it. I did some EQ moves on it as well, but I wanted some extra juice in it. So Mixcentric helps to add some extra frequencies into it. And then finally, the limiter, Ozone 8 Elements, not only gave me an EQ curve, suggested EQ curve to make it suitable for commercial purposes, I also had the option to extend the imaging a little bit, make it slightly more stereo than it already was. And then finally, the maximizer brings it up to a commercial volume. One more thing I need to mention is the reverb. So for the reverb, I put in east-west spaces 2 on a separate bus, and I send individual instruments that need more reverb or need to be put in a space to that reverb. So for example, if we go to the drum beat, this is what it sounds like without the reverb. Okay, and with some reverb. You can definitely hear that, right? I turned it way up, so it was way more reverberant in the mix. And that's because J-Death Orchestra is recorded relatively dry. Even with its hall mic, you can still hear it's kind of a more intimate, smaller sound. So I needed that extra reverb to put it in a space, and then it blended well with the other percussion tracks that I had here, which were recorded mainly in the Sony scoring stage in Los Angeles and also Taldex Studios in Berlin, which are both larger halls. So just adding some reverb to put everything in the same space is quite necessary. Cool. And that's about it, really. I mean, mixing is it can be very simple if you start with a good arrangement and if you start with good levels, because mixing is all about balancing. And if you can hear all the instruments, then you're set and you're good to go. Everything else you do is just a way to enhance the overall track and put it in a really nice cohesive space. And if you work from the mix bus first and get a nice sound out of the box, right away, then it makes processing all the other tracks so much easier if you need to do it at all. And for this case, I felt I didn't need to, right? In other styles of music, you have to apply compression to many things to get, to lose some of the dynamics and to get it really punchy and hitting hard. But in orchestral music, we typically don't use too much compression because we want to maintain the natural dynamics. We want to maintain the feel and the breathe, like the breath in and expression in a lot of the instruments. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. And in general, just very little processing required. But yeah, everything is just pretty simple, I think. This piece is relatively simple musically, arrangement-wise. I love using the bowed strings. I love using the plucked strings here and there. Percussion really gave it that nice driving force. And then the woodwinds gave it that nice human expression and, that really nice dynamic layer that, just really emotional sound. So yeah, this was a lot of fun to work on. I haven't had so much fun working on a piece of music in a while. So, this I think it was because it's a new style for me as well, like kind of venturing into my roots and just going into a style that I should know better as someone who's Chinese. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Again, feel free to download the mixing checklist down below in the description box if you haven't yet, just to follow along for your next mixes. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up and leave me a comment and let me know, which part of the mixing process stood out to you the most. Maybe the number of plugins surprised you. I don't know. But yeah, let me know what you think. And if you're interested in writing like this type of music, like Chinese music, I'd love to know as well. And, Jade Ethnic Orchestra is definitely a really solid choice for that style of music. It's one of the only options on the market for that style right now. So you're definitely in good hands when it comes to Jade Ethnic Orchestra, I can tell you that. In any case, thank you so much for watching this series. I really appreciate it. I'll see you in another video very soon. And yeah, just take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.